Em 2021, o Digital, a fusão do mundo físico e digital, passou a fazer parte das nossas vidas como nunca, proporcionando diversas experiências de aprendizado. No quarto ano do Maker Day Brasil, numa edição híbrida, vamos pôr as mãos na massa, tanto online quanto presencialmente. Toda a comunidade Maker irá se conectar. Serão 24 American Spaces de todo o Brasil a compartilhar suas melhores práticas e ideias. Vamos voltar às raízes do movimento Maker, buscando soluções para os desafios de hoje. Esta será a Green Edition, com atividades focadas em questões de sustentabilidade e de responsabilidade ambiental, com atividades colaborativas, criativas e inovadoras. Dia 25 de setembro, a quarta edição do Maker Day Brasil, Green Edition.
Olá, professores, pais, alunos e makers. Bem-vindo à quarta edição do Maker Day Brasil. Este ano é a edição verde, com o slogan Criando movimentos sustentáveis através da cultura maker. Gostaria de parabenizar os 24 espaços americanos que estão participando e oferecendo programas makers inovadores em seus espaços e também online. Todos vocês que se inscreveram para participar desta nova edição podem se considerar makers. Por meio da inovação e criatividade, os makers sempre buscaram criar soluções para os desafios do nosso cotidiano. Uma mentalidade maker é o que o mundo precisa agora, mais do que nunca, para lidar com os inúmeros desafios que enfrentamos, particularmente na área do meio ambiente. Por meio dessa colaboração, vocês, como makers, podem trabalhar juntos para desenvolver soluções para criar um mundo mais verde e melhor para o amanhã. Você verá essa engenhosidade em todos os programas oferecidos no Maker Day Brasil, que você pode fazer com segurança em sua casa. Aproveite a oportunidade, desafie seu conhecimento, compartilhe e aprenda coisas novas, mas acima de tudo, divirta-se.
Venha participar da quarta edição do Maker Day Brasil com 24 dos nossos centros binacionais espalhados pelo país. Este ano a edição vai ser bem green, com foco em buscar soluções para problemas ambientais na sua comunidade, criar produtos sustentáveis como um robô reciclado e muito mais. Venha exercitar sua criatividade e suas habilidades neste dia Maker. Nos vemos dia 25 de setembro.
Oi pessoal, eu gostaria de convidar vocês à quarta edição do Maker Day Brasil, ao Green Maker Edition. Vai ser uma muito divertida dia com atividades mão na massa com nossos 24 espaços americanos ao redor do Brasil. Seria uma oportunidade a refletir sobre os problemas ambientais das suas comunidades e possíveis soluções. Vamos ver vocês lá.
Oi galera, vocês têm uma oportunidade incrível de participar da quarta edição do Maker Day com nossa rede de espaços americanos. E desta vez é verde. Aprende a fazer um robô com materiais reciclados, faça papel com semetes ou faça seu próprio galho de chuva. E ouço o som da chuva caindo a qualquer hora de qualquer lugar. Tantos projetos legais, não perca a oportunidade.
Hello, hello, welcome. If you're here, welcome. Welcome on behalf of Maker Day Brazil. And we are live here on YouTube. And we also have the very special presence of the IPEU Manaus teachers who are our special guests and are here on Zoom with us to take part in this presentation. And our great, fantastic guest is Luciana, who is actually in Argentina at the moment. Luciana has been involved in English language teaching for over 25 years. And she is here with us today as a courtesy, as a gift from the National Geographic Learning Publishing Company. Thank you very much, National Geographic Learning, for giving us the opportunity to have Luciana with us today. And Luciana is going to be talking about making-centered learning. Now, what is making-centered learning? She will explore what it is making-centered learning, what it promotes, and how to effectively plan for it to happen. We would like to ask you to keep your mics off. We would like you to participate by writing your questions in the chat box. If you are on YouTube, you can also write your questions, and Luciana will answer all the questions that she possibly can throughout her presentation. If any questions are left unanswered, we will do our very best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Luciana Fernández, thank you so much for being here with us. It is a great honor. You have been to Manaus before, and we were planning for you to come back, and we will have a tacacá next time you come, we promise. Thank you very much, and break a leg with your presentation.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. It makes me so happy every time I have an opportunity to share any professional development sessions with you. My name is Luciana, and I am delighted to have the possibility to be with all of you on behalf of National Geographic Learning. Thank you, NGL, for making this possible. And I am just blown away with the possibility of talking about making-centered learning, what it is, what happens in a maker space. And I really hope that you all make the most of this session. As you know, if you've got doubts or questions, I will be more than happy to read them as I am presenting and addressing the questions as I am presenting. And of course, we're going to have time to keep on expanding on your doubts and questions at the end of the session. But if that's okay with everybody, I'm going to start now by sharing my slides. And that's how we're going to have officially this session started. So, maker-centered learning in action. Let's see what this session is going to be about. I would like to get started by sharing with all of you the agenda for today. I always like doing that so that you know how ambitious the session is going to be. And this is exactly how I have structured this session today. There's no way we can be talking about maker-centered learning if we don't stop to think for a minute, what is a maker? Because in maker education, there is this belief that every student is a maker. And if that is the starting point, we need to start reflecting upon what a maker is. Then we're going to be moving on to maker-centered learning. And there is something very interesting I would like to share with all of you today, which is sensitivity to design, because this is what should happen in a maker space. We're going to be talking about the dispositions that we want to make habits in our makers. And I intend at this very point to be discussing the what, the how, and the who. Then, of course, we will also look briefly at the arena in which makers are working their magic, right? The maker space. We're going to be briefly addressing what a maker space is, what's in one, but from a pedagogical perspective, if you know what I mean. And last but not least, we're going to be discussing how is it that maker-centered learning can actually occur in a makerspace or in a classroom. We're going to be talking about implementation and what it looks like. So as you can see, we've got a lot to address, so we'd better get started. So, first thing we're going to be exploring together today. What is a maker? And this is what I was telling you just a minute ago, right? If we want to be part of the maker movement, if we believe in maker education, this is because we also believe that students are makers. But what is a maker? Let's see. I would like to share with you the characteristics of makers. Let's see if you agree with me. Makers are curious. Curiosity needs to be present in our maker space, in our classrooms. Makers are explorers. They pursue projects that they are personally interested in. Makers are playful. They play with ideas, they play with materials, they play with thoughts. They often work on projects that show a sense of whimsy. They are risk takers. And you know what? A characteristic of a maker is that the maker is not afraid to try things that he or she has never tried before. And another characteristic of makers is that they take on responsibility. Now, these are characteristics of makers. And if we are maker educators, we need to have all these assumptions in mind, especially this question of curiosity, because curiosity is the starting point, isn't it? Now, moving on, there are more characteristics that we need to explore. Makers enjoy taking on projects that can help others. And I was fascinated to read that this is a green edition. I just loved it because that is exactly what this is about. It's about helping others also, right? Makers are persistent. They don't give up easily. They are resourceful. They look for materials and inspiration in unlikely places. Makers share. They are optimistic. I like that. And they believe, look at this characteristic, which I on purpose highlighted in green, if you know what I mean. They believe they can make a difference in the world. And I think that this edition in particular is about that, isn't it? It's about participating in projects that aim at creating an impact in own lives and the lives of others, and definitely making a difference in the world. Now, since I am curious myself, I've been browsing the very many interesting sessions you are going to be enjoying in this Maker Day Brazil 2021. And I know that you will be enjoying sessions that are absolutely related to this green edition, but it is the intention of my session to go to the pedagogical aspect of the Maker movement. And so we're gonna get now to a part I'm really interested in, which is sensitivity to design and the dispositions that Maker educators need to develop in these makers that are in my maker space or in my own classroom. Now, dear everybody, if we're going to be talking about maker education, we need to know that there are 3 very important dispositions that are at the heart of maker education. And you've got them there on the screen. Looking closely is one. Exploring complexity is another one. And finding opportunity is another one. I remember visiting the makerspace at Gibel some years ago, and I was like blown away. And probably because it was the first time that I actually had the opportunity to see a real makerspace. I had read about makerspaces, but at that time I was in one. Ever since then, I've been visiting lots of institutions because of my job that actually have makerspaces, and even teachers and institutions that were implementing the maker movement. But there was something I was observing as an advisor I am, and that was the fact that not all the time this that I am mentioning was happening. Looked like that students were there in the maker space interacting with lots of machines and interesting materials, but what about the cognitive part of a maker? That is where I thought I needed to do some research and started helping teachers. So this is what I would like to share with you today, all right? Having materials and machines and a wonderful space is part of the whole equation, right? So that's why it's very important that we look at these 3 dispositions: looking closely, exploring complexity, and finding opportunity. Let us go to the first of the dispositions we are discussing today, everyone. Looking closely. This is providing our makers with the possibility to look carefully at objects and their systems in order for our makers to notice the intricacies, the nuances, and the details. Slow looking in a world that lives in a rush. This is quite a thing, isn't it? Observing. By looking closely, and you probably as adults and as educators, you know what happens when you stop to think about something and look at something closely. What happens? Thinking begins. So when you look closely at anything, you begin to see the complexities in those objects or in those systems. And I'm going to be telling you something after now many years of working with the maker movement. Our students need opportunities to look closely that we teachers have to plan for. We need to plan for these opportunities for our students to observe and look closely. And something that I want to share with you is that this disposition, looking closely, is made up of different moves. And something that I am sharing with you, and by the end of the session, I'm going to be sharing with all of you my email address, because if you want me to share a copy of the presentation, I will. And if you want me to share the resources, I will. But I want you to pay attention to the moves that fall into this umbrella term called looking closely. Noticing is part of looking closely. And if you pay attention to the chart you've got on the screen, it says, notice everything. Learners cast a wide net to capture all that they can observe. So this is like, look at this object or look at this system and tell me everything you notice. So noticing is one of the moves. Another move is revisiting. And this is when learners, apart from spotting everything they can notice, they look, they listen, they touch again to see if they can find something new. So this would be grabbing an object and changing its position to see if I discover something that I hadn't discovered before. Another move is using categories. So it's like beginning to group or connecting what you're noticing with something that you might know already. Juxtapose. Learners looking at things side by side, comparing, observing relationships. Physically changing perspectives also. Looking at something from high, from low, from far away, from close. And of course, other moves that can happen when you're actually looking closely. And I want you, what I'm sharing with you, which you have on the screen right now, is an assessment tool for this moment in which you are engaging in getting your makers to look closely. With some important questions that as a maker educator, you need to ask yourself, like, what is the learner, if the learner is working individually, or the group doing that shows this move in action? So as a maker educator that you are, as students are engaged in looking closely, you're going to notice that one of your makers actually decided to get a magnifying glass to be able to get more details. That's a behavior that goes hand in hand with a move. So you're going to be observing and noticing the moves that students are making for the sake of looking closely. And as you are observing what students are doing, you need to notice what students are doing. And of course, with this information that you gather, what you have to do is keep this in mind as you are teaching. If you notice that your students are not looking closely enough, or if they are not making different moves to make good observations, you probably want to teach them more moves or want to model them for them. So you bear them in mind for your future teaching. You target those moves. You can tell your students specifically for a next project, you know what? I've been noticing that when you are looking at something, you are always looking at something from the same perspective. And it is very important that we look at something from different perspectives. So you make your students aware, hoping that the following time they give it a try. Exploring complexity is the other disposition of a maker that you need to plan specifically for. This is when you engage your learners in investigating the interactions between the various parts or people associated with objects and systems. And this includes the range of values, motivations, and priorities held by the individuals who engage with particular objects and systems. It's not just a matter of looking closely and noticing. It's about now how those parts that are part of that object or that system, how is it that they interact? What's the relationship? This is the moment when we are getting deep into what we are looking closely at. And once again, I would like to share with you all an assessment tool for this disposition. Because again, exploring complexities has certain moves we need to model for our students and teach them. For example, explore inner worldlings, all right? What are the parts within and how do parts interact? Exploring points of view, different perspectives. Can you look at this from different perspectives? Prove your own perspective and become aware, this is very important, that probably the way in which you are looking at something is biased by your own assumptions and your own beliefs. Looking back and forward, exploring the histories and the possible futures. How did this come to be? Where does this object come from? As a result of what? And where might this object be going in the future? Do you think this will keep on existing in the future? Yes, no, why? Tinker to explore. We're going to be talking about this in a second. Taking things apart, putting things together, playing around with things. This is part of this very important disposition, which is exploring complexity. And once again, you're going to be observing your students acting at this very moment. And if you notice that they are not using any of these moves, you make them part of your explicit teaching. Because in maker education, and as a maker educator, you are a model of these dispositions. You don't have to take for granted that these dispositions come with your students. Now, last but not least, what a moment, finding opportunity. What is this disposition about? Now that you have looked closely and that you, of course, paid attention to the complexities of what you have been looking at, you need to build on those close observations and explorations of complexity. And this is the moment where we are providing our makers with a potential for building, tinkering, redesigning, or hacking objects and systems. And again, as a maker educator, it's absolutely important not only that we know that these dispositions are critical in maker-centered learning, but that you are also familiar with the words that I have mentioned right now. But before we move on to that, again, this is a disposition, finding opportunity, where we've got some moves within. And those moves are, for example, envision. This is the moment when students have been looking at something, they've been thinking about its complexities, and now they imagine what could be invented, or what or how that they have been looking at closely and thinking about could be altered or changed. Another move is reframing. It's rethinking, refocusing, redefining a problem, an opportunity, or a procedure. Hacking, repurposing, making or drawing a plan, because that idea that is in your head needs to begin to come alive. Identifying steps, sketching what that you've got in your mind might look like. How is it that it could work? It's got to do with illustrating ideas and processes. Source resources. This is a moment in which a maker is going to be proactive and creative as for where he or she is going to find the information, the advice, or the instruction needed to make that project come to life. Prototyping and testing, making models, running tests, trying things out to see if that which you had in your mind actually works. I don't know about you, but this makes me so enthusiastic, right? And we teachers have the power to promote all these opportunities. Once again, you need to observe your makers in action. Are they carrying out these moves, or do they lack them? And if they do, remember, I am the teacher of these moves, the model of these moves. I am the expert helping my makers. And these are the very important words any maker educator needs to be familiar with. Because this is all about providing our students with the possibility to build, to tinker, to redesign, and to hack. Every time I mention the word hacking, people go like, are we going to be educating hackers? Probably because the word hacker has a negative connotation. But I'm not going to be defining building and redesigning because they are clear, right? But let us go to tinkering and hacking within maker education. And I would like to start with this amazing quote by Thomas Edison saying, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And the reason why I'm bringing this quote, which I love, is because it is the very spirit of maker education, isn't it? It's not failure, it's trial and error. This doesn't work, so I need to go for a different alternative. I need to keep trying. Imagine where this world would be if all the brilliant and creative makers we've had all throughout history had given up the very first time they tried, huh? So the reason why I'm bringing this now is because we are going to be now looking at tinkering, all right? Tinkering is at the heart of invention. And this is providing our students with the possibility to play with materials and figuring out just how anything can be assembled. If not, look at the example on the screen. How amazing is that? Oopsie, I'm sorry. Tinkering is about hands-on experiences, learning from failures, and unstructured time to explore and invent. And it is through the process of exploration and invention that, of course, lies the potential for innovation. So you need to become absolutely familiar with this word, tinkering. But then we've got hacking, and I love this image that I found and I had to share with you because it's a perfect example of what hacking is. A hacker is going to take an everyday item and hack it, which means modify it so that it serves a new purpose. And at this very moment, I want all of you to have a moment of honesty with me. Aren't we all hackers on a daily basis? We are constantly using something for a different purpose. Sometimes we want to reach something which is very high, and we start thinking what which we have around we can use for the purpose of reaching what we need to reach. We are hackers every day. And of course, hacking is part of maker-centered learning. But now, we've made it to a very important part of the session in which we're going to be looking at maker-centered learning, the what, the how, and the who. And of course, we're going to start with a very important question that I made reference to before. And this is what I was telling you, that when I started visiting schools with maker spaces, or those schools that were claiming that they were into the maker movement, I started noticing that there were very flashy maker spaces, but not much was going on in terms of cognition and learning. This is why I'm addressing this in the hope that each and every of you can reflect upon your practice. Let us begin by answering this question. Who and what are the teachers in maker-centered learning? The truth is that all these agents you've got on the screen are the teachers in maker-centered learning. In the first place, students are teachers. Teachers in the community. The reason why in the question I'm saying what, who, and what are the teachers is because sometimes a website can be a teacher. Something I read on a blog can be a teacher. A tutorial can be a teacher. And the other teacher in maker-centered learning happens to be tools and materials. Let me expand on this. Why do we say that in maker-centered learning, students are teachers? This is a fundamental part of maker education, that students are given the possibility to teach one another, that they can teach you, the teacher. Let me tell you something. I have studied also neuroscience, and I can't help making connections here. Neuroscience claims that if you really want to know if somebody has learned something, you need to get them to explain it to you. If somebody can explain something to you, that's the best evidence of learning that you can get. And I couldn't agree more. So you need to get students to teach to other students and to teach you. And also, whenever possible, give students the possibility to teach others within the school community or even beyond. In a nutshell, it's all about providing students with the possibility to teach, to show what they have learned to others. Another teacher in maker-centered learning are people in the community. Community members, they can be wonderful learning resources for your students. Consider community workers, or even if you are teachers at a school and you know that Maria's mom, she's a doctor or she's a dentist, and somebody is working on a project related to that, why not giving that mom that is a dentist the possibility to become a source of information? So teachers in the community. But of course also, students will need to access the internet in search for information or instruction, finding a tutorial, finding, I don't know, a website, a blog, information on the internet that might help me with what I'm making, what I'm building, what I'm creating, the project that I'm working on. And then of course, other teachers are tools and materials, because in maker education, students need to be able to interact with tools and materials, and it is through this physical interaction that they are going to be learning as well. There are lots of implications for this for us teachers. One of the things that I want to do in this session is make you aware that for maker education to happen, you need to intentionally plan for it. This means that as a teacher, you will have to plan for opportunities for students to teach other students, to teach you, and to teach others within the school community. You will have to provide opportunities for students to think who in the community might become a source of information for them, and promote opportunities for that. You need also to understand that if students will be accessing the array of information they have access to in internet, you might have a very critical role to play as a critical thinking teacher. And of course, if students are going to be learning from tools and materials, this means that up to a certain extent, you are also responsible for the materials and tools available in makerspaces. But let's move on to other very important questions. I don't know if there are any questions by the audience. I am really looking forward to answering any doubt. I really hope I'm not going very fast and very furious, and that you are keeping up with my pace. And if you think I'm yelling at you, please don't get me wrong. It's just I'm so passionate about this topic. It's passion. It's not that I'm yelling at you. I hope you know me. Some of you know me already. So let's move on. Another very important question to answer at this point is, what does teaching look like in the Maker-Centered Learning classroom? And this is another very important thing to bear in mind if you're going to be planning for Maker-Centered Learning to take place. Facilitating student collaboration is critical. One of the amazing skills that Maker education fosters is collaboration. But you need to teach your students intra and interpersonal skills development. You need to tell them what collaboration is all about, and you need to promote opportunities for collaboration. And I just love what's coming next. You need to encourage co-inspiration and co-critique, and also redirect authority. But let me clarify what is it that I'm talking about. You teachers need to structure the projects and assignments that you bring to your makerspace or classroom in order to encourage your students to work together. You also need to encourage co-inspiration. You need to design instruction so that students can engage with and derive inspiration from the work of others. You need to give explicit opportunities for students to see what others are doing, because probably the work of somebody else is what gets me started. Also encouraging co-critique. This is about you teachers providing strategies and support so that students can give, look at this, informative, useful, and generous feedback to each other. So that when students are actually getting to know what others are working on, they become useful in terms of providing powerful feedback. And one of the characteristics that I like the most is the one I am mentioning right now, redirecting authority. One of the fantastic things about maker-centered learning is that teachers need to actively redirect students away from the fallback that the teacher is the authority who knows everything. And if you start creating that or working on that belief with your students that you are not the authority, you are redirecting them and getting them to find other sources. It could be my partners, it could be somebody at home, it could be information that I've got in a book or in any website on the internet. The teacher is going to be the authority and is going to be imparting knowledge at given moments, but it's all about getting our makers to become resourceful. So we have already discussed the what, the who, the how, and of course, the time has come for us to talk about, as I said before, the arena where everything happens. What is a makerspace? What is it and what's in one? And the truth is that I wanted to answer these questions from a pedagogical perspective. What do we find in our makerspace? Well, definitely tools and materials from a variety of disciplines. And I would like to highlight here variety of disciplines, all right? Because if in a makerspace, we have materials from a variety of disciplines, we are also encouraging interdisciplinarity in that makerspace. We also find storage and visibility. We store the things, the materials and the tools, and we make them visible and easy to access. And another characteristic which is mandatory when it comes to a makerspace is that there are some specific spaces that will always be there, probably in the same space within the makerspace, but some other spaces within the makerspace are going to be flexible. Now, this is like the ABC of a makerspace, but this is what I wanted to share with you all. A makerspace, no matter its size, no matter where it is, no matter how fancy or less elaborate it can be, it must always be a place where collaborative work happens. It is a space inside a school or institution for making, for learning, for exploring, and for sharing. And let me clarify something. In a makerspace, we use high tech and even no tech at all. The reason why I'm clarifying this is because sometimes I talk about the maker movement in my talks, and sometimes people go like, oh, well, that sounds amazing, but there's no budget at school for that. Or sometimes you show a photo of an amazing makerspace and some people at given institutions go like, oh, well, we'll never have that. And I keep telling everybody, each and every of us, no matter where we work, we can make any space a makerspace. So the spirit of a makerspace is that inside that space, there is collaboration, learning, making, exploring, and sharing going on. A makerspace might include machines, but it doesn't need to include machines, all right? If it does, much better. But having machines is not a condition for a space to be named makerspace, if you know what I mean. So it's really very important that we understand that in a makerspace, we are, look at this, I just love it. I should have highlighted it in red. Makerspaces are spaces where we are preparing students with the critical skills that they need to shine in the fields of science, technology, engineering, art, and math. That's why probably you also must have heard about STEAM education. So mind what I'm going to say to you now. If you are lucky enough to work at a place where there is a makerspace and it's full of gadgets and machines and stuff, that's fantastic. But those of you who don't have that privilege, don't let that stop you from being a maker educator. You can make every space a makerspace, because at the very heart of a makerspace, we are developing 21st century skills. Makerspaces, no matter their size, no matter where they are, no matter how many machines and technology and stuff for students to work with, they must always provide hands-on learning and help develop critical thinking, and foster entrepreneurship. This is at the very heart of a maker space. So now we are getting to the end, but we still have a section to address. How do we implement this? What does maker-centered learning actually look like? And we are getting into a very interesting section right now, because this is what maker-centered learning is all about and how it can be implemented by teachers. Making-centered learning is about these three areas that we've got on the screen right now. And we are going to be addressing them one by one. The first one refers to thinking routines. Maker education needs to include thinking routines. And we're going to be talking about that in a second. The second icon is making reference to the activities, the tasks in which we are going to be engaging our students in. And the third icon is making reference to documentation. And these are critical in making centered learning. Let us begin with thinking routines, everybody. Thinking routines offer our students mini strategies that encourage active processing and build on our learners' background knowledge. But what I like the most about thinking routines is that they are intended to build in our students habits of mind that creators, innovators, and designers use all the time. I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favorites, but there are many maker education thinking routines. And I'm also going to be sharing with you the access to where you can get to even download the PDF for these routines, which are great. One of them is called Parts, Purposes, and Complexities. The other one is called Parts, Perspectives, and Me. And the other one I'm going to be sharing with you today is called Parts, People, Interactions. And the last one, which I also like very much, which is called Imagine If. So just before we explore these 4 thinking routines as an example of my point now, thinking routines are steps, mini strategies made up of a few steps that we teachers bring to the makerspace on purpose to routinize cognitive processes that have to do with learning, thinking, innovating, creating, and designing. Let's explore some of these ideas. Let's begin with parts, purposes, complexities. Probably this is already making you connect with the dispositions we were clarifying before. Do you remember? Looking closely, looking at complexities, and finding opportunity. This is a routine that goes like this. Choose an object or system and ask yourself the following questions. As you are looking at that object or at that system, what are its parts? What are the purposes of those parts? And what are the complexities? And the questions within the questions are, what are its various pieces of components? Looking closely. What are the purposes of those parts? And what are the complexities? How is it complicated in its parts and purposes? And how is the relationship between two or in other ways? If we use this routine, and when we say routine, what do we mean? We don't do it once in a blue moon. We do it frequently. That's why we call it a routine. The intention of thinking routines is to create habits of mind. This is a thinking routine that, as a name, helps learners slow down and make careful, detailed observations. And of course, it's a routine that encourages students to look beyond the obvious, all right? This thinking routine helps stimulate curiosity. It gets students to wonder, come up with questions, and of course, surfaces the areas for further inquiry. This is, of all the routines I'm going to be sharing with you, this is like number one routine, slowing down, observing. I'm even thinking that in the case of a language teacher, this is an excellent routine to practice, for example, the language of description. I can see there is, there are, prepositions of place. Communicatively, we are giving our students very good reasons to practice the language. Now, what about another routine? Parts, perspectives, and me. I love this routine as well. What are the parts? What are the various pieces of components? I'm still looking closely. What perspectives can you look at it from? Isn't this amazing? Let's imagine that I'm observing an object and I am encouraging my students to look at that object from the perspective of a user or the perspective of a maker or from different physical perspectives. Do you remember that was one of the moves in looking closely? And the third question is, how are you involved? What connections do you have or can you make? What assumptions or interests or personal circumstances shape the way you see this? This is helping our students understand that as we are observing something, our bias is there all the time. This is a routine that helps our students explore complexity by encouraging them to look closely at the details of something, considering different viewpoints, users, stakeholders, and of course, making a personal connection with that they are observing. A fantastic routine to implement. Then there is the third one we are exploring today. Parts, people, interactions. And this routine goes like this. What are the parts of this system that you are observing? Who are the people connected to the system? How do the people in the system interact with each other? Notice that this is I remember once giving a presentation about this, and there was this history teacher who said, my goodness, so I can make my own history class a makerspace. And I said, voila, exactly. So how does a change in one element of the system affect the rest of the parts of the system? Isn't that amazing? Are you aware of how much thinking is going on as we engage students in routines like this one? This thinking routine helps learners slow down, look closely at systems, and in doing so, our students can situate objects within systems and recognize the various people who participate, directly or indirectly, within a particular system. I strongly recommend, again, this routine. And one of my favorites, the imagine if. You get students to choose an object or system, and you ask them, or you encourage them to ask themselves the following questions. In what ways could this be made more effective? In what ways could it be made more efficient? In what ways could this that I am looking at be made more ethical? And in what ways could this be made more beautiful? Isn't it amazing? This is a routine that encourages divergent thinking, because it gets students to think of other possibilities for an object or for a system. But then it also encourages convergent thinking, because students then decide upon an effective approach to build, tinker, redesign, or hack that object or system. Now, dear everybody, I am sharing with you here right now the link to more maker-centered learning thinking routines, which are amazing. If you go to this link, remember that you can send me an email and I can share my presentation. If you go to this link, you're going to have access to each and every of the learning of the maker-centered learning routines, how you need to go about them, and even the PDFs to print so that you can use them in your classes. So believe me, I'm sharing gold with you, okay? So you do want to go to this link where you will have amazing learning thinking routines. but we need to move on because time is tyrannic. We are now moving on to the second icon, activities. The activities that really need to be part of a maker space or maker classroom. There are many. I just brought my favorite for you today. Design questions, observational drawing, taking apart, design hunt, materials exploration, learning walk, and mapping systems. Let's see what these are about. Design questions, all right? If you really want your makers to have sensitivity to design, you need to bring thought-provoking and design sensitivity questions. For example, you're looking at an object and I ask you, what is the context of this object? When and where do you think this was designed or made? What do you think was happening at that place and time when this was made? Who do you think made this? Who do you think designed it? Why might that be important to know? Whose perspectives are represented in what you are looking at? And whose voices are the loudest and the quietest? I love that. Whose voices and perspectives do you think this object or system represents? Another one that I like very much. Who appears to be invited to participate in using this? All these questions, if you have never asked them before, let me please beg you that you ask them, because you won't believe the answers your students are going to provide and how passionately they are going to engage in debating and thinking. So I'm not going to read them all because I am pretty sure you are going to ask me to share the presentation with you, but I have included them here so that you have a guide of the type of questions that we call design questions. Another fantastic thing you must always encourage students to do is observational drawing, all right? And this is like getting students to choose an object to examine, okay? Asking them to activate prior knowledge. What do you think you know about this object? And then make a series of quick observational drawings of the object. I always encourage maker educators to do observational drawing because it gets students to slow down, to copy, to notice. And in the same way, I always encourage teachers to encourage their learners to draw what's on their mind. When students come up with an idea, how amazing it is that they can sketch it, that they can draw it. Taking apart, okay? Remember that this is part of what tinkering is, all right? So students might be invited to choose an object and examine through a mechanical dissection. I always get to know about parents who say, oh, my son or my daughter is always doing that. They are always taking things apart and examining, and well, that's the characteristic of a maker, right? So before diving into dissecting, consider what tools do you need to disassemble the object? And what do you think you will actually be learning about the object if you disassemble it? And as you are taking apart the object, how would you name or describe each part? Because when you disassemble an object, you come up with pieces that probably you've never seen before. An activity that I always do with students is asking them to name a part that they don't have a name for. And I always tell them, why did you decide to name it like this? And usually it has to do with their hypothesis of the function of that part in particular. Does it seem like this part was designed to be taken apart, or as you are taking it apart, you're going to be causing something to the object? And of course, more questions, all right? What more questions are coming to your mind now that you have disassembled the object? Because this is physically, if you think about it, getting to the heart of an object. And another favorite of mine, I promise we are getting to an end, learning walk. Do you remember that one of the things that we really, really wanted to foster in maker education is learning from others? getting the possibility to see what others are doing, because maybe what others are doing will become the inspiration for what I will do. And this is all about helping our makers in our makerspace become observers, feedback providers, and of course, learners. So students might be invited to go around and check on what the other groups are doing. And the questions that you can bring to the classroom are, what are they learning from trial and error? What design choices have they made that seem promising in your opinion? What roles and responsibilities do the group members have? What is one cool thing you want to share back with your group when you go back and you tell them you can't imagine what that other group is making? What is one piece of advice you can offer your group from the observations that you've made in other groups? You can't imagine what the other group was doing. I think we should do that as well. All these questions are really good, and the learning walk is a learning opportunity. That's why we call it that way. If you want more maker-centered learning activities, another golden link, okay, where you're going to get access to more of these type of activities that you need to bring to your maker space or to your maker classroom. And the last element is documentation, all right? Documentation is another very important part of maker education. It's going to help you and your learners reflect on their thinking and their learning. You probably remember by now the 3 dispositions we have been discussing all throughout the session: looking closely, exploring complexity, and finding opportunity. I want to share with you some of the tools you will have access to, because I'm also going to be giving you the link, but there are possibilities of self-documentation, students documenting their own work, or students documenting observation of the work of others. So this is the same template, but the difference is one is for self-documentation and the other one is based on another learner's. So it goes like this. It's metacognition per se. Recall a time when you were using one of the making moves. So the moves I described today at the very beginning, do you remember? Making a connection, connecting the parts, asking a question. So this is now students becoming aware that they have made a given move. That's why we call this metacognition, because it's thinking about their own thinking. As you were looking slowly at this object, did you notice you were making any of these moves? If you were observing something together with your group, did you notice that another partner of yours made a given move? So these are excellent templates for documentation and metacognition. Recall a time when you were using one of the making moves. Explain what you were working on or trying to achieve when you use the making move. So probably you want to say, well, I wanted to see what was inside, so I made the following move. It's going over our thinking. What did it sound like? And here in this beautiful template, students are provided with a speech bubble so that they record there something they said or something they thought at that very moment. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is, in the first place, I'm totally biased because I love teaching critical thinking explicitly, but at the same time, because I think it is a characteristic of the maker movement. You're going to have fantastic documentation ideas in this link that I'm sharing with you, all right? So I've given you gold with the thinking routines, documentation, and activities that you can bring to your maker spaces and your maker classrooms. But we are reaching the moment of conclusions, people. The maker movement invites our students sometimes to copy. Do you think you can try making something exactly as? I love engaging students in this type of tasks. But we can go a step further into advance, right? Gain more advanced knowledge and skills by doing similar projects, something similar to, not copying. Embellish, add something to, to that which has already been done and put yourself into it. I love it. Modifying. Take what others have done, modify it or morph it into something new until we get to the highest or the most ambitious of the things we can ask students to do inside a makerspace, which is getting them to create something completely new, different from what has been created before. And I'm telling you these people because some people think that it's always about creating. It's not always about creating. There are other opportunities to provide. And last but not least, I love the launch cycle. It's all about inviting students to look, listen, and learn. That's why the disposition is look closely. The more closely you look, the more questions come to your mind. The more questions that come to your mind, the more curious you are. And you know what happens when you are curious, right? You need to find answers. So in order to find answers, you need to navigate ideas. And as you are navigating ideas, you're going to be creating a prototype. And then that prototype is going to give you a couple of headaches, won't it? Helping you to overcome frustration. But once you get it, you are more than ready to share that with others. And the fantastic thing about the Maker movement is how it provides all throughout the cycle opportunities for our students to develop the 4 C's: communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. So now, dear everybody, I have made it to the end. But before I do, I would like to read a poem to you. This is a poem written by a teacher trainee of mine. Her name is Marcela, and she's a poet, and she has written this amazing poem called To Teach or to Reach. To teach or to reach, that is the question. Whether it is better for the mind to be filled and bombarded by lists, dates, and notions, or to be spurred and ignited by why nots and emotions. To teach or to reach, that is the question. Whether it is better for the kid to be caged and kept in a cute, comfy class, or to be pushed to spread wings and dare to drift and try and err, while we watch and guide, always alert. To teach or to reach, to give or to incite, to make them repeat or let them design, to force them to follow or move them to lead, to avoid the unknown or embrace what is free. I hope you have loved it as much as I have, and I keep reading it and I get emotional when I read it, because I think that we all want our students to reach. So dear everybody, as I promised I would, here is my email address if you want me to share a copy of this presentation with you, and any resources, or if you have questions that we might not have the time to address, this is the way in which we can remain in contact, and nothing is going to make me happier. Thank you once again, everybody, and I'm absolutely ready for questions now.
Luciana, thank you very much for this absolutely fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
To teach or to reach, that sums it all up beautifully. And you have provoked us. You have thrown light on various important elements of the Maker movement and how we can use it in the classroom with our students.
Absolutely.
And you have inspired us to try out the activities that you yourself named them as gold. Thank you very, very much. I have a comment, and then we have a question from a teacher. From what I understand, the teacher's mindset to be inserted or to be aligned with the Maker movement is that I am the teacher of the Maker movement. I am the teacher, sorry, of these Maker moves. You yourself said that. the moves of finding opportunities, looking closely and exploring complexities. And then you said, I am the expert on these moves because I am the teacher and I want to teach to reach. I am the model. So we can trigger or hinder these moves in our learners, right, Luciana?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And this is a huge responsibility. But this is what being an educator is all about, isn't it?
I think so. One of the, I am really thankful for that. One of the things that I keep repeating to teachers as a teacher trainer I am, is that if we think that the only role we have is to impart knowledge, we have already been replaced by Google. Now, on the other hand, if we understand that Google will never teach our students to think critically, to have thinking dispositions, and that we are the only ones who can equip our students with the skills that they will need to thrive in the world. When you understand, and I love the fact that you used the word responsibility, because this is exactly what it is. We are absolutely responsible for everything that happens or does not happen in our makerspace or in our classrooms. And this is not being harsh on us teachers. These are my words to empower you. Because
Exactly.
the moment you realize, I always say that we teachers have a lot of power on our students, for good and for bad, for good and for bad. And modeling, Zaira, modeling is a very important word in pedagogy. And this is just food for thought. How many times do we expect our students to do certain things we never taught them how to do, or we never showed them how to do? Or sometimes, more ironically, we expect them to do things we don't do ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So in maker education, I need to be curious. I need to show them that I'm also curious about their work. I need to model what happens when you're truly curious about something. I need to be an observer. There are lots of strategies called thinking aloud, for example, modeling the questions that go in your mind as you are making inferences, hypotheses. We cannot take it for granted. This is why I was saying that many times I've watched things going on in maker spaces, and it was just students playing around with objects and materials, and I was saying probably a lot is going on in that student's mind, but the student is not aware and the teacher is also missing it. So we need to structure our lessons. We need to plan for these opportunities to happen. I could go on forever and ever, and I know it's going to get very late.
Thank you very much. There's just a question here, Luciana, from one of our teachers, actually.
All right.
How do you see our makerspace in Manaus? You've already said that, actually, that you were amazed when you first saw it. Compared to other makerspaces in Brazil, even to other Latin American countries. And regarding Argentina, how is the maker engagement in the public and private school sector? This is the question.
Well,
did you understand?
Yes, I think I did. I want to tell you very honestly that by the time I visited your makerspace, it was the first makerspace I was actually visiting. I had seen photos of makerspaces in other countries. I had read about makerspaces, but I had never seen one. And probably that's why I was so blown away. And I don't know well, there were a couple of teachers with me at that moment when I visited, and I was in complete awe. I was like, it was the first time that I had the opportunity to see a 3D printer, for example. And I still have like a key holder that I was given as a present. And I thought the place was completely amazing, big, spacious, with the ABCs of a makerspace, if you know what I mean, with machines and different types of objects of all kinds from different disciplines, with spaces that promoted collaboration. I'm not going to lie to you. I wish I had seen it with students inside in action. That would have given me a clearer idea of what this or how the space is used. But I guess that many years have gone by now, and you are probably more experienced. Now, to tell you the truth, and it might sound like I'm telling it to you because it's you, but it's probably one of the best maker spaces I've seen. Here in Argentina, not many schools have maker spaces. The whole maker movement is relatively new here in Argentina, and mostly being adopted by private elite schools. And it's relatively new. For example, robotics is now kind of mandatory in many schools, but it's quite new. I don't think I can go back more than 2 years ago. So I guess I'm going to be able to establish a comparison in a couple of years' time.
Thank you. Luciana, thank you very, very much once again. Thank you, National Geographic, for giving us this opportunity to have Luciana here with us.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege for me. It is.
It is our privilege, actually. Very much our privilege. And we would also like to thank all the teachers who took part in this event. We would like to thank the American Embassy, who is helping us organize the event, and the 24 binational centers in Brazil, who are also taking part in the whole event and in this particular one also. And Alexandre asked me to invite everyone to take part in the Green Maker Challenge. To do that, you have to go to www.makerspaceBrazil.com/challenges. And yeah, we'd like you to participate and to encourage your students to do the same.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations on this initiative, on being, my goodness, you are pioneers. I don't know if you are aware of that. You are true pioneers, and thank you once again, National Geographic Learning and you, for this amazing opportunity. And I look forward to visiting you soon. And why not have the opportunity to see that makerspace full of makers in action? I would really love to see that.
Actually, today we had a teacher, actually quite a lot of teachers, a variety of teachers who went to the makerspace for a series of activities. And it is wonderful to see the students in action. It's absolutely fantastic.
I bet, and I'm dying to see that happening. So all my love from here to there. You know that you are kind of family to me. I'm really thankful. Take care of yourselves, and let's really hope that we can see each other soon.
Thank you, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much.
Beijo. Thank you.
Muito beijo. Bye bye. Thank you, and excuse me for my Portuguese. Bye bye, everybody.
Obrigada.
Obrigada. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.